Today I want to introduce a conversation between myself and Tae Kim, author of The Nvidia Way. The book covers the company's history, starting with its co-founders. It starts with Jensen's experiences coming to and growing up in the United States, and it goes to Nvidia's founding and entrance into the graphics card space, how the company struggled to get out its first products, the mistakes they made in doing so, as well as what changes they made to overcome those mistakes and thrive. Uniquely, it also takes you into the mind of Nvidia's competitors like 3DFX. Tay did interviews with important employees of those companies to learn their thinking as well. The book takes you into the room when the phrase GPU was first coined, and it goes into deep detail about how CUDA became the moat that it is considered today. The collaborations with academics and scientists, the strategic decision to invest in it, so on. There's also a very fun anecdote of one Nvidia executive and Steve Jobs that eventually leads to an Apple-Nvidia collaboration. Watch out for that. Speaking of Apple, the book ends with a detailed picture of how Nvidia works and how Jensen Huang basically sits at the center of it all. It reminds me of a passage in the 2011 article by Adam Lashinsky, Inside Apple. Every conversation with insiders about Apple, even if it doesn't start out about Jobs, eventually comes around to him. The creative process at Apple is one of constantly preparing someone, be it one's boss's boss, or oneself, for a presentation to Jobs. Anyway, you can tell that this book took a lot of work, and I'll continue to refer to it many times in future videos down the line. Alright then, let's get to the interview. Oh, and one last thing, forgive me for my terrible audio. Fortunately, I don't talk that much. I'll do better next time.
Welcome to the show, Tae Kim. How are you doing?
Good, good. John, thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, you have a very interesting book. It was very just ripped through it. It was very fun. How did it get started, and kind of what's the story behind it?
So I mean, I've been following Nvidia ever for my whole life. I mean, from the 1990s, I was a PC gamer, building my own gaming PCs, and I've been following it. When I was on Wall Street, I invested in it at a hedge fund. So I've known Nvidia from the early days. And for the last 10 years, I've been in media, Yahoo Finance, CNBC, Barron's. I was at Bloomberg Opinion. So I've been following it as a journalist also. But I got an email in May of last year, 2023, and it was a cold email. I did not know the person. It was an editor at Norton. And he said, Matthew Ball, he wrote the famous Metaverse book, said that you could do a book on NVIDIA. Would you be interested in that? And the first thing I did was like, first of all, what's Norton? I didn't know Norton, unfortunately. And they're actually a very well-regarded publishing house, making books for all these Nobel Prize-winning academics and Ben Bernanke. So the people in the newsroom were like, yeah, no, Norton's a really big deal. And the second thing I did was go right to Amazon and said, there's no way no one has written a book on NVIDIA. I mean, it's the biggest chip maker, chip designer by market cap, 30-year history. Yeah. Every internet company in the world has, multiple books on it. Amazon, Facebook, even Apple, and every major tech company. And that there was no book. I couldn't believe it. There was like no book on NVIDIA. And I was like, like I've been buying their graphics cards for 30 years. Like I know the business side, I know the finance side, and I know the technology side, and I've been in media for 10 years. I was like, I can do this. I can write this book. So I had a meeting with the editor at Bryant Park, Bryant Cafe, and within weeks I had a book deal. It went by so fast, and I was off and running.
It's kind of crazy, right? Like you talked a little bit about how Jensen reluctantly somewhat agreed to the book. Like, did he kind of say anything? Has he read it yet? And did you have anything to say before you?
He hasn't read it yet. No, he hasn't read it yet. I'm sure they'll read it in a few days. Um, so I've known Jensen from the beginning. I met him like I think 20, 30 years ago when he was capital raising with Morgan Stanley on the secondary. He probably doesn't remember me. I mean, I talked to him a little bit. Um, he's a very intense person, and he takes things personally. I wrote negatively on Nvidia like during the whole crypto boom, so I'm sure he has that in his mind, in the back of his mind. So for the first few months, I mean, I've had a good relationship with the company. They, let me talk to the CFO every quarter. But for the first few months, I mean, obviously, I told them I'm writing this book, and the first few months they were very non-committal. They were like, "Well, we're not so sure," and I just went to work, started interviewing all the early NVIDIA employees, all the early senior management team at NVIDIA, and surprisingly, they were ecstatic to talk to me because they're like, NVIDIA is such a great company. I had such a great experience there. There are all these amazing stories, and no one has told a story. Like, this is great. Like, someone's writing a book on it. So after I get through like 6 or 8 calls, like word got around back to NVIDIA that Tae's being very serious and substantive on it, and maybe you guys should cooperate. So they start cooperating, and they pretty much gave access to all their senior management team. They helped me facilitate interviews with co-founders, which is fantastic, and it worked out really well in the end.
Yeah, it's actually quite struggle. It was a bit of a struggle. I did a video about NVIDIA a long time ago, and it's like during their graphics card rise, and like this is so much more detailed than what I could have done at that time. And there was so little information. It is very strange. It is a lot of that stuff, I guess, would almost be lost to the sands of time otherwise.
I Yeah, like it was really difficult the first 10 years because the internet really didn't really take off to like maybe the early 2000s. I mean, there were websites in the late 90s, but a lot of them have disappeared. And there's
Mm.
some internet archive stuff, but it was really hard even to get press releases. So that was difficult. But, I pretty much got the entire senior management for the first 10 years to talk to me because they were so happy to talk. So I mean, it was an honor, like to be able to compile all this like computer history. I'm a big fan of, early computers and business history and strategy, and being able to talk to the co-founders of 3DFX. And I don't know if you were really into PC gaming back then, but they were the dominant graphics card company for several years, and it's kind of amazing Nvidia was able to overtake them. But being able to talk to the co-founders of 3DFX and like why they faltered. I mean, that's it was so cool. Like
It
being able
is.
to talk to those two founders.
Yeah, it is. It's actually a big. It's one of the things I really appreciate about the book. You get to see the other side from the competitors competing with NVIDIA. That's very unique. I don't see that quite often, and it's very thorough here.
and,
Um,
and they're very honest about like how they lost. They got too fixated on features instead of the schedule. They wanted to make the perfect fit chip, and Jensen's the exact opposite. Almost the schedule became the feature because they kind of matched up to all the PC makers and how they buy chips for their computers. And to go from like 18 months to 6 month cycle is just, I mean, it was such a genius strategy, and they're doing that right now with the AI GPUs, like going from 2 years to 1 year. Like think about if you're like AMD trying to compete with this, like oh my god, like when they accelerate the product cycles, it's really difficult to compete, and that's exactly what happened to the 3DFX and all like Matrox. There are like dozens of graphics companies, S3, they just couldn't compete because
did,
the relentless execution of that.
did you feel like there's opportunities that other competitors could have done to sort of beat back NVIDIA or sort of kind of like defeat them? Because there were such times that they stumbled, right? Like,
Yeah. So the two, I mean, the two major competitors I would say were 3DFX, and they made this. They had really good engineering. They made like two really good graphics cards, and then they couldn't do the 2D side, which is really funny. Like that's the easy side, the 2D of the you need the 2D and the 3D, and they couldn't do the 2D. Um, and then like they just made this ridiculously terrible strategic decision in buying STB Systems, which was actually 3DFX's biggest board partner. And when they bought that company, it just it was just hard to manage. It's so the board partners buy the graphics chips and then they put it on the graphics card and then sell it to PC makers and consumers. And when 3DFX bought STB, they wanted to be the brand, and they couldn't handle the inventory. It was a complete debacle. Like all the inventory piled up, they couldn't manage the supply chain, and obviously, all the other board makers that competed with STB were like, "We're not gonna." We're just going to switch to Nvidia. So it actually helped Nvidia in the end because all the other board partners switched to Nvidia. So that was a crucial mistake by 3DFX, and it directly led to their bankruptcy, where they couldn't manage the supply chain inventory.
You mentioned another time, another
Oh,
second time.
so the other big one was ATI. So it's kind of funny. It's connected to 3DFX. So Jensen told me a reason why they messed up right after was the NV30. It's the famous leaf blower, chip that was bloated and super loud fans because it was overheating and all that stuff. So Jensen told me the reason why the NV30 was like a complete disaster was they hired 100 3DFX engineers at the same time, and then it was hard to integrate them. They didn't talk to each other that well. The NVIDIA team didn't really talk to the 3DFX engineers as well. They didn't talk to the game developers as closely, and they skipped out on features that are really important to game developers. So there was a really communication cultural problem. And they also had this issue with Microsoft, which I found out that they were fighting about legal issues, and Microsoft was like, fine, we're not going to give you the DirectX 9 tech specs ahead of time. So they were kind of designing the NV30 in the blind. They didn't know exactly how things would turn out, and it was a complete disaster. And ATI bought ArtX, which was like, I think they made the GameCube chips, and they were, really good at designing graphics chips, and they designed the R300, which was so much better than NV30 in every way. Like all the frame rate reviews for all the top games, it was better, faster, quieter, and it was sold at the same price. Now, Dwight Dierks, who heads software engineering at NVIDIA, when I interviewed him, he was like, this was a critical moment because if ATI was smart and thought, like really ruthlessly on the business side, they could have easily bankrupted us. Because if they cut the price of their R300 graphics card, so the 9700 was one of the main ones. I actually bought that one when I was a gamer back then. They could have cut their prices and destroyed them because they had so much more margin than them, and Nvidia was barely making money at the price. I think it was $399. So, and he said like if Jensen ran ATI, it would have been. He knew the obvious business knew. He knew what should be done, and he would have bankrupted Nvidia. So there's like a lot of moments like this where they just have these near-death experiences, and Jensen is so resourceful to come up with solutions. There was in middle of 1998, they were literally weeks away from having no cash. There are a variety of reasons to that. They had this manufacturing problem with TSMC. Intel was breathing down their neck. And he was able to convince their three board partners to say, why don't you give us money? You know our technology is good. Just we'll give you a 10% off the IPO when we eventually IPO. Just give us some money right now. And he was able to pull that together in weeks. And the CFO admits this was all Jensen. It wasn't me. Like Jensen was able to talk to the board partners like Diamond Multimedia and just like convince them this is a good action for them to take. Another big instance was when they had the first couple chip disasters, their first two chips. It's kind of unbelievable that Jensen was able to keep raising money when their first two chips were a complete disaster. But their third chip, the Riva 128, they were working on it, and one critical not mistake, but one critical fault they had is Curtis Prim was telling me they didn't, which is one of the three co-founders, they didn't have the ability to make a really good VGA core. And that was a big problem because Doom was the biggest game of the day. And even though it's not really a 3D graphics game, people still play Doom and Doom 2. So you needed a really good 2D VGA core. And NVIDIA didn't have it. And they didn't have anyone that could make a VGA core, the 2D stuff. So Jensen just somehow, and Curtis was like, I'm blown away by this, but Jensen somehow licensed a 2D core from one of their main competitors. Got that license for WeTech, it was called, and then after they got the license, he hired like the VGA designer from WeTech. He like took their top person, Gopal, who's critical and more. So every point where they're about to die, like Jensen is resourceful and comes up with some kind of solution or convinces someone to give them money or a license to survive. And that happens time and time again. And I think he's relentless. Like when he's recruiting people, like people say no to him again and again and again, and he just comes after you. And then eventually you agree. He's constantly I mean, one of the three things I say about the Nvidia way is insane work ethic, and we could talk about that. Like people work like crazy, and there's this talent cultivation, and then there's speed and velocity, and we've talked about the speed and velocity part. But the talent cultivation is every time he talks to someone, like he was talking to the co-founder Scott Sellers of 3DFX, actually trying to hire him before he even started 3DFX, and he was asking him, who's really good that you've worked with, like in the past? Who'd you work with that was really awesome? Like who's the rock stars? And he said, oh, I worked with Dwight. He was amazing. Dwight Dierks, who he eventually hires. So he's constantly pocketing knowledge and then using that later. And yeah, so Jensen is the reason why Nvidia has been able to survive in this like crazy industry where everyone goes bankrupt or gets bought. I mean, we're talking like numbers change here and there, but like 80 to 100 companies did graphics chips from the 1990s and on, and Nvidia is the lone survivor. I mean, that wasn't acquired or went bankrupt.
You talked a little bit about Intel. You just mentioned Intel right now, and I actually tweeted about the Intel thing. They had to kill Intel, kill Intel. What was that? What went on there? Like what?
So this was in 1998 too, right after the Revo 128 came out, and that was a success. But then sales started petering out, and Intel, they're the big Goliath. They're the company that was 860 times larger than Nvidia in revenue at the time. So they're the chip king. They're coming around like this Nvidia, yeah. They're making some money with this Revo 128. It's getting a lot of traction. So we're gonna. I'm just playing the Intel dominant gorilla right now. We're gonna snuff them out. So they told all the PC makers we're coming out with the i740 that's gonna have better image quality. It's gonna be faster. It's gonna be great. And why are you buying this these chips from Nvidia? Like you should just wait and buy our chip when it comes out, like around February or March of '98. And that completely destroyed Nvidia's pipeline because the PC makers are like, oh, Intel might come out with something better. So Jensen just was kind of like, oh my God, this is really bad. Our pipeline is drying up. So at the company meeting, he's famous for saying, we're always 30 days away from being out of business. And this time it was true. A lot of times it wasn't, but he basically said, Intel is out to get us. They're out to kill us, and we have to acknowledge that, internalize that, and fight back. And we have to go kill Intel. And that might sound like superficial, but the employees really took it to heart. And one of the kind of unsung heroes of the book is Caroline Landry, and she's almost like a moral compass of Nvidia in their early years. And there's other stories about why, but she remembers that being so invigorated and riled up after Jensen gave that speech that she started working even longer hours than the long hours she was already working. She was like working past midnight, working all weekends, waking up at 4 or 5 in the morning. And even though she wants to go back to sleep because she just came back home after working at midnight, she's like, no, I have to go. We kill Intel. We must kill Intel, and that got her riled up to go back to work and make the next chip better, and then actually turned out when Intel's i740 came out, it wasn't that great, and it kind of just faded into oblivion. But I mean, Microsoft did that in the 80s all the time. Like it's called FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, and vaporware, right? Like they would an application software company would come out with a great piece of software, and Microsoft will say, we're going to make something that's very similar. So why are you buying this? And that would like kill the sales of that third party application provider all the time. So it's a common practice in the computer industry, and Jensen was able to figure out a way to get his employees all excited to do better. So I think those are like really important, and he's done that throughout NVIDIA's history.
Yeah. You talked a little bit about kind of like CUDA and how, or actually a lot. I actually really found that really interesting because and when I did my video, it was barely sort of mentioned that, and you gave us so much more depth. Like, what was sort of the thing that kind of defined, like, did they have any sort of direction when they're making CUDA, kind of driving it to adoption? Like, was there any plan, or what were they thinking about at the time?
So I mean, CUDA is such an amazing story because it took so long to really take off. I mean, it's so obvious now that it's a huge part of their moat, and it's the reason why NVIDIA is doing so well now. But back then, in 2006 and going into 2006, like it wasn't obvious, and it was a huge expense. It was a huge R&D expense. They took a huge part of the chip die, so it cost a lot of money. It destroyed their gross margins, and early on, it was just a concept, right? It's a parallel computing platform, an ecosystem, and it was just Jensen like thinking about the future and where the computing industry would go, like high performance computing would eventually go to parallel computing devices like GPUs that you could split up workloads into so that they could run on thousands of cores at the same time and eventually tens of thousands versus CPUs that typically ran things serially and had only like 4 to 8 cores. Like he knew that as computing becomes more data intensive, accelerated computing is what he calls it, would win the day someday. But the first few years, like, they didn't really generate any revenue off of it. They had like some, scientific scientists that used it to do simulations, predict the weather or like do kind of molecular biology kind of analysis, but it wasn't generating big revenues in any shape or fashion. And he still kept going at it, even when internally people are saying this is a complete, waste of time. We're not making any real money off of it. He just kept going. And even when Wall Street was breathing down his neck, in 2011, we're talking 6, 7 years. And,
Right.
and eventually it started taking off as, people started using it for high-end engineering and scientific simulations and things like that. But it was a slow grind all the way up. And Jensen kept going. Like even when Wall Street was telling him, you really need to cut this out and stop this, he just kept going. And eventually, it took off when the AI stuff really happened 2, 3 years ago. But if you think about it, that's like 15 years, you
Right.
know? And if you look at NVIDIA's data center revenue, it's like going up, it's fine, but it didn't really take off until, when ChatGPT came out. It wasn't even when ChatGPT came out. It was like two quarters after it came out. And that kind of long-term thinking, I kind of related to like Reed Hastings with Netflix. Like
Hmm.
it's a very similar thing. Like Reed Hastings knew eventually he had this intuitive sense that the technology market would go to video streaming over the internet. He didn't know exactly when the technology would be able to do it, like every broadband infrastructure, internet access on the consumer side. But he knew that's where it was going to go. So he's going to position Netflix with to take advantage of that opportunity when it becomes viable with technology. But on the side, in the meantime, he'll build up the DVD rental business, and that will be the revenue. Nvidia does that time and time again, like with 3D graphics, programmable GPUs, CUDA, tensor cores with AI, and then the full data center solutions with Mellanox and all that stuff. So Jensen's constantly looking out at the future, 5, 10, 15 years. He has an intuitive sense of where the market will eventually go, and he positions NVIDIA to have the best technology, the best ecosystem, the best assets to take advantage of the opportunity when it happens. And like
I,
DLSS isn't. Go ahead. So
yeah, I'm really,
DLSS is another
yeah,
reason. Yeah. So that
yeah.
took 6 years. Ray tracing took 10 years. Like no other company that I know of like does this kind of bleeding edge R&D research that becomes commercializable. Like there's so many examples of companies in history where like Kodak, invents the digital camera, but like they don't really capitalize on it. Like Xerox made the Windows GUI interface.
You talked a lot about kind of like, one of the most fascinating parts of 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 the book is when you talk about the email culture at Nvidia and this top five emails thing, and he's just running through emails. Like, can you give me a sense of what that email culture is like at the company? Because it's very distinct, I think. Do you even have a
Yeah,
name for it? For these
it's
emails?
it's just top five emails, and so let me just explain what that is. And this is was there since the beginning. So Jensen loves email. He is constantly on email, and to this day, there are people that left Nvidia, 20 years ago, that can email him, and he'll instantly respond within a minute. Like he is on email. Like when BlackBerry came out, he was like even on it even more. But since the beginning, it just was a way for him to kind of beat down the bureaucracy that usually happens in the company, right?
Mm.
So most companies, as they get bigger, the manager does a status report, and then the managers, cleans up that status report, takes out all the negative stuff that could be seen badly. So you get this sanitized status report, and by the time he gets to the CEO, it's completely useless. It doesn't help him steer the company. So this email culture, they started this thing called top five emails, where it's either every week or every 2 weeks every employee in the company writes an email to their team, their manager, and to various distribution lists that Jensen can access. What are the top five things that they saw this week, or top five things they're working on? What's the most important thing? Is there like a big competitor that did something? Is there a new technology that came out? Is there a really cool AI paper? So every employee writes, the top five things they're working on, top five things they're seeing. So everyone on their team knows what's happening or what they're working on. Jensen reads 100 of these every day. So he has the pulse on what's going on at Nvidia. No one can hide. No one can hide if things are going well, if things are going poorly. He knows what people are working on. He knows if the vision that he lays out or what people are executing on, because he reads the top. He's constantly all weekend long, Sunday evenings. He's reading these top five emails, and I don't think other companies do this. Like other companies, I've been involved in large companies. It is the bureaucratic kind of like filter that goes upwards, and people take out all the bad news because they don't want to get in trouble. And
Mm.
at Nvidia, you have to be honest. There's this thing called intellectual honesty where you, if it's good or bad, you have to tell the truth. And if you hide stuff, like say if you hide stuff, and then it blows up like 6 months later, that is like the worst thing at Nvidia. You would get destroyed if you did something like that. You always have to be honest and tell your team at all times if things are going badly or poorly or I need some help. Like there's a saying like no one loses alone. Like it's fine if you're falling behind. You need to tell your team, and then we'll get you help. That's a catchphrase, one of the Jensenisms I call it at Nvidia. So this top five emails thing, like he that it for for the last few decades, that's his way of seeing what's happening, how he's getting informed of what Nvidia is working on, and it's not a one way thing. He's constantly, if someone writes a top five email that he's interested in, he'll send them a quick email. It's like, what's that? What's this? What are you doing here? How come you're not doing it that way? So that's his management style, and that's why he has 60 direct reports, which is I think unique in corporate America. Like
Mm.
there's usually a chief operating officer. There's usually like 5 or 6 executives that are underneath the CEO. No, for Jensen, because he has this email culture where he can send quick emails very quickly all day long, and he works more than anyone else. That's why he can manage 60 people directly.
does he jump? You kind of mentioned this a little bit in passing, but does he jump um, titles? I guess does he jump levels within the company to reach out to people directly?
Yes, yes. So that's part of the culture as well. And NVIDIA managers tell me, you know, that's just part of what NVIDIA is. And most companies, usually the CEO talks to the manager before they talk to an employee. At NVIDIA, they have all levels of NVIDIA in the room at the same time. And Jensen loves to talk to the entry level, junior level people because a lot of those people are doing the actual work on the ground, and he's constantly peppering them. And what NVIDIA managers say is, if you're an employee under me, like it's fine. If you're talking to Jensen, just let me know what happened after the fact, so they can know that Jensen is asking around in their division. But yeah, I mean that is the transparency. That is the no silos mentality at NVIDIA. Like he is constantly talking to people at all levels of the company.
Interesting. What kind of sort of productivity, after kind of interacting with them, what sort of productivity or work things did you take away for your own self?
I think it, I've tried to be more blunt and direct. I mean, that's difficult in the corporate environment, but it really does save time, right? Like so much of stuff in the workplace is like we get involved in these long meetings and then meeting after meeting after meeting, and then you're always worried about you don't want to get your colleague upset at you, or you don't want to embarrass your colleague, so you do offline meetings and then you do calls. It's a huge time sink, and it uses up a lot of time. And if you're just blunt and direct and say, I have this issue and I don't think we're going in the right direction. I did this during my whole book process. I was like, it's just better to be straightforward instead of like trying to coddle people's feelings. And it works. It gets people done. People get on the same page, and then your colleague will work in the same direction and do what you want. Because people are generally they want to be effective, and I think like after this whole process, I feel like I have this AI Jensen on my shoulder telling me, you know, be blunt and direct. The two most important things that I cover in the book are mission is the boss, which means do what is the right decision for the company and the customer,
Hmm.
not what's good for your boss's boss. And so much in corporate America, like a huge percentage, I'm not even kidding, like 30 to 50% of the time, you're doing stuff that doesn't really help your end customer. You're doing stuff to make your boss look better to his boss, right? So if you can minimize that and cut that out, the mission is the boss. Focus on the mission, not your boss's bonus at the end of the year, right? And the other part is speed of light, which means work with extreme speed and velocity. So typically at most companies, when you do a project, you have these KPIs and you tell your boss, oh, I did 10% better than last time. I did really well, or we did 10% better than the competitor at this. If you did that in NVIDIA, you would get dressed down and yelled at. Like, they don't care about, what you did last time. They don't care about how you compare to other companies or how you benchmark. They care about what's physically possible. If everything was perfect, queues, lag in between, whatever, we want to get to the point where it's like you get to the physical limits of physics, right? So there might be a lag between one process in the factory and another factory, and there's inventory, whatever. No, we want to shut all the wasted time down to what's limited by physics. And if you do everything in that way, no competitor can beat you, right?
Mm.
Because you're doing it to the ultimate extent of the speed of light.
Hmm.
So that's why NVIDIA does well. If everything is benchmarked to the ultimate possible fastest way you can do something at the highest quality, then a competitor can't match you because you're already doing it at the best way, the ultimate fastest way, most productive way. So if you do those two things: emission is boss and speed of light. I mean, you're going to outperform nearly everyone else because so much of, especially large technology companies, I hear like horror stories. Like when you work at Google, you have to get approval of five different stakeholders. Intel's the same thing. You have to do the same PowerPoint presentation to like half a dozen people, and nothing gets done. Like nothing moves forward. And then Nvidia, you do one presentation to Jensen with like 20 people in the room, and they get to a decision, and you go and execute. Right? There's no delay. There's no indecision paralysis. So
Is it a
I think that's the
presentation or a
big.
whiteboard?
It's a whiteboard primarily, right? So that's the other thing. He loves the whiteboard. He hates PowerPoint. So at most companies, it's a PowerPoint where you just go through the slides and talk through the slides, right? At NVIDIA, they want you to take that marker, go up to the whiteboard and explain everything and defend every single thing you say. Like, I want to do this for this product. You have to defend it with data and facts and whatever. It's a very active process. I think that's completely different. Like I've been involved with companies where it's I was a management consultant, and that end product is just PowerPoints, right? That's not NVIDIA.
You mentioned that he likes this one brand of marker sold in Taiwan. Do you know what that brand is?
I do have a photo of it. I could send it to you afterwards. I mean, it doesn't have English. It yeah, it's yeah. I can't read it, but I could send it to you afterwards.
I told all my friends in Taiwan, I was like, do you know what this brand is? Have you heard of this brand? It's like, have you heard of markers? They're so weirded out.
Yeah.
Do you
So
have,
so go ahead.
go ahead. Do you have a favorite Jensenism other than the two you mentioned? Because he's so quotable. He's very quotable.
So this Jensenism I think is really good, and I don't know. I like it because I think it's funny. Like, uh, and I think he took it from for the guy that started Ferrari. So this Jensen is second place is the first loser, right? He does not want to be in second place. So this story comes from this marketing manager who came from a competitive I think it was S3, which was another graphics chip company. And when you're at they these like PC gaming magazines, they do these spreads and they say, this is the best graphics chip that we recommend, and here's number two and number three based on benchmarks. For that magazine, Nvidia came in number two. At his prior company, number two was fine. That's great. We're number two. For the He showed that to Jensen, and he did not like it. It's like, no, we have to win. We have to be number one. Second place is the first loser. Um, that really shows his extreme competitiveness, and that's why he works so hard because he wants to win. I have this funny story about like he one of the CFOs in the early years was like he was ranked at top 50 uh, in the U.S. at chess earlier in his life. So he was like, very, very good at chess. So Jensen knew this, right? So he wanted to beat him at chess. So he studied like crazy all the openings and whatever, and he would play him. And Jeff Rebar, the CFO, like, I mean, he knew like what Jensen was doing. He like was memorizing all these openings. So he just had to do something that's kind of like out of kilter. And Jensen couldn't react because he was just memorized openings and he was just doing it, very in a stilted way. So he just destroyed Jensen every time they played chess. And Jensen just like, he couldn't take it. He couldn't take someone was better than him. So every time he lost, he would flip the chessboard over. And then he would be like, Jeff, we're playing ping pong right now. So Jensen grew up as a ping pong champion. So he was really good at ping pong. So he would get Jeff to play ping pong with him so he could beat him badly at something else to make him feel better. So Jensen is like, he needs to win, like extreme competitive. So that just shows you his character, right? I mean, playing chess with your coworker, it's not that important. But to him, he needs it. He needs to win everything at all the time.
When you talk to other people at Nvidia, do you feel like you're speaking to a mini Jensen, or do you feel like kind of Do they repeat his like what he says and all that, like, or
There's I mean I don't want to name them, but there's a couple that definitely like adore Jensen and want to be Jensen, and they're trying to be Jensen. That's their life goal. Um, most other it, there's a wide variety of personality types and whatever. And the one thing is, the people that stay at Nvidia have work ethic that you wouldn't believe, right? The people that don't usually burn out within a few years. Um, but personality wise, like there's a wide variety of how people relate and whatever. So I wouldn't say the whole company is like full of mini Jensens, um, but they do appreciate like how he works and the work culture that is at Nvidia. Like every person that left Nvidia says when they joined a different organization, they had a difficult time adjusting because it's hard to be blunt and direct because people get really offended. Um, it's hard to move fast with decisions because you have to get buy-in is the word, right? You have to get buy-in from this person and that person and this person. So I think that's the big takeaway. Is like people really have a tough time working at other companies after they work at Nvidia.
do you think Nvidia survives without Jensen?
So I've been asked this a few times. I think it really depends on the CEO that takes over, and I don't think that's happening anytime soon because he keeps saying he loves Nvidia and this is his life and he loves working. So I don't see Jensen leaving Nvidia anytime soon, but eventually, someone will take over, and it really depends on who the CEO is. I mean, are we going to get a Satya Nadella, right? Or are we gonna get a Steve Ballmer or John Scully? Every major, tech giant. It really depends on the CEO and who they get. And it's really hard to speculate, who could fill Jensen's shoes at this point.
Well, like, I'm really fascinated about kind of like how he just keeps motivated. Like, right? You said, and you wrote about like he's like top what, three current CEO, longest tenured CEO. Like, and then I guess like what do you think motivates him to just keep doing, especially now when it's like he's the biggest company in the world, there's no one left to chase, probably he has billions in the bank and all that. Like, what do you think motivates him?
I mean, I think he's just very competitive. So, and he loves what he does. He thinks he's having a huge impact on the world positively. I mean, he's super excited about how NVIDIA is enabling digital biology, potentially curing diseases and cancers. So I think that's what drives him. But another thing, he's super proud of what he's been able to do with his I mean, he really feels NVIDIA employees are his family. And he was very down on himself when he had to do a couple layoffs in NVIDIA's history. He still feels bad about that, I heard. But I think he is super proud that he's helping all these employees' families do well, right? They could pay off their college educations, help their families do well financially. So I think he's very proud of that he's been able to help his employees and their families.
You mentioned just now biology. He's proud of the biology work. Like when speaking with him, when you're interviewing, what sort of questions do you feel got him most worked up? Like what really got him just rambling?
So I think he didn't like how the early employees kind of looking back at NVIDIA's early years nostalgically, like he did not like that. He even joked that if he was involved in NVIDIA's first 15 years, because kind of embarrassed by all the mistakes and mismanagement, he would like that. He like laughed about that because I think that's part of his like relentless improvement and like seeing the flaws more than anything. So he doesn't see the first 10-15 years of NVIDIA as his like great origin story, which I think it is a great origin story. And it was very strange that I had to defend the early. I mean, you guys grew faster than any other chip company in history, and like you're like bashing it as like some terrible mismanaged company. But I think that's part of why he does well. Like he is so scared of becoming overconfident and complacent that he tricks his mind. He tricks himself to say, no, you suck. You're terrible. You're not good. On the flip side, that story came from like they had like a blowout quarter, and Jensen came into the room and said, "In the mirror today, I said you suck. Like you suck, Jensen." So on the flip side, when something's like really hard and like he's like kind of getting worried that how we're gonna do this, he tells himself, "How hard can it be? How hard can it be? We'll figure it out." So he does these mental tricks. Like he uses these catchphrases with other people too. Like how hard can it be? I mean, it turns out to be pretty damn hard. But if you just kind of convince yourself mentally, both ways, don't get too high on yourself and don't get too low on yourself. It works. I mean, it's almost like a personal psychologist.
You talked a little bit about like one of my favorite talks where you were talking to, excuse me, their partners, right? Like their manufacturing partners, TSMC. You spoke to Rick Tae, and that was fantastic because you talked about like this concept of rough justice. Can you explain a little bit more what that was about?
So, like that conversation with Rick was one of the coolest things of and we had a nice long conversation about other stuff too. So that's like one of the coolest things about this book thing is that you get access to these major historical figures and you can ask them questions about everything and they're very open. So Rick said that when he was the main contact from TSMC for Nvidia, so he came to meet Jensen pretty often. They went to like it was a little bit above a Denny's, he said, like a mid-level restaurant and they're having some issues in manufacturing, whatever. But this is one of the early meetings between Jensen and Rick, and he said that Jensen's like, let me tell you this, I have this business philosophy of rough justice. So what that means is sometimes in any particular deal or interaction, you might get 60% of the benefit and I get 40% of the deal, right? But next time, it might flip around where the other person gets 60% and 40%. It's never going to be perfectly 50-50, right? But if we work together and have a strong, trusted relationship where over time it becomes 50-50, that's a great partnership. So Rick was like, wow, that's kind of really brilliant. Like, it might be at this particular moment, TSMC might need, to get the better of this interaction, or Nvidia might really need TSMC's help. Maybe it's low yields or whatever problems that you really need to help us here. We really need you. So you're always there for the other partner at different times, and as long as over time, over for a few years, it comes out to about even 50-50. That's a good partnership. So Rick was like, that's really profound. And that's exactly what, happened. He said, I think Jensen would say the same thing, but Rick said, this is like one of the strongest partnerships in technology history over 25 years or so. So I think that was very profound. Like it's almost like a friend. Like when your friend is having some issues or whatever, you're there for your friend, right? And then your friend will be there for you when you're going through some problems. And that's how they did business.
Interesting. What things do you think NVIDIA didn't do throughout their rise that was significant to their success? Like what were some like missteps that they strategically or whatever that they avoided successfully?
So like a misstep, like they didn't do, or
Yeah, like they would have been a disaster if they'd done that.
I mean, they did try to do the mobile chips. There's all these stories about they tried to get Samsung to use their chips, and I don't know if they actually got that Samsung Galaxy contract. I don't think that would have helped. Like to be a supplier to be the Qualcomm of mobile phones and smartphones. It's like it's not really what they do. It's their
Interesting.
stuff tends to be like high performance, high power, and it's not low power, which is kind of funny because like Nvidia is reportedly gonna do some AI PC stuff probably within a year. But uh, yeah, it's not what they do. I think it would have diverted some focus and management if they actually succeeded with Tegra, and they didn't succeed. Other than the Nintendo Switch, which is a very small part of the business.
Do you find it's a challenge now? Like the company's way different, right? Like so different now. How does how is Jensen trying to instill, I guess, quote unquote fear, like now that they have, all this success and everyone's talking about how amazing they are. You talked about like how he himself kind of psychs himself out, but like how does he still drive fear to all these people who are probably all millionaires, like multi-millionaires, right? From because of all their Nvidia stock. Like how do they keep them, I guess, pushing as hard as they can?
I think he just kind of retained the right people. Like all these senior employees that I've talked to, a lot of them have stayed 15, 20, 25 years, and they've been wealthy for a long time, and they still work like crazy. I think you just get the people that are, this is their life, that they love um, designing and engineering these great products that are changing the world in so many different ways, especially now more than they ever with this AI stuff. And we're not talking about video games anymore. We're talking about something that could change the world in robotics and digital biology, like we said. Um, you're just getting people that have a passion for the mission, and from what I've seen, I mean, the people I've talked to, they're not slacking off at all. And if you do slack off, Jensen will be all over you. So you don't want to be there. And the people that do want to slack off, they retire. I mean, a lot of people have retired. Um,
Like this is like I said, this is amazing, but I've been reading it as you speak to me about it. What do you want readers to take away from it? Like after kind of, you know, what do they want? What do you want them to think about going into it, and what do you want them to take away from it?
so, like I said, I had this AI Jensen about mission and the boss and speed of light. I think it is a more effective way of dealing and doing your work and being more productive. I definitely do think that. Um, Also, I do want people to like the whole corporate thing. I don't know if we touched on it, but I do think there is a lot of dysfunction inside large corporations, and the people that become CEOs are nothing like Jensen. They're the schmoozers and the MBAs and finance types, and I do think technical competence. Like I wish every company would put competent people on top of the company to make the decisions, and not these marketing MBA finance people. That's another thing. Um, and the last thing I would say is I think Nvidia's story and history shows there's no shortcuts, right? Like Jensen talks about what I wish upon you to be successful is a lot of pain and suffering because it's only through the trials. I mean, it's funny, but it's true. It's only through the trials that you learn and you pocket that learning and improve later on. So I want people to know that and all internet is full of like all these ads about you don't have to work hard, just do this. All these influencers trying to share these get rich quick schemes. No, like the Jensen story, the Nvidia story is you have to work hard, you have to go through pain and suffering, and it's going to be rewarding in the end. There are no shortcuts. It's work, it's effort, and then you know you get the reward at the end. So I think that's the main takeaway.
Thanks. Yeah, I kind of really kind of that stuck with me as well. Tay, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
John, thanks so much for having me. It was a blast. Thanks so much.
All right, let me stop recording.